This episode is a segment from our review of the book Desiring God. Continuing the conversation on Christian hedonism, we ask the question, is drinking alcohol sinful? Is sinfulness a matter of morality or legality? Is it better to be straight edge or learn from your mistakes? If you want to listen to the whole book review, we'll be posting that in its entirety as well. We hope you enjoy both. You're listening to Campfire Theology, where we explore topics you usually wouldn't discuss in church. So gather around with us because we believe the conversation itself is holy.
So when I was growing up, it was sort of invested in the straight edge scene. So the idea that
I can't really see that.
You had to abstain from alcohol, tobacco, or other drugs. Some people didn't.
Also, please sign this contract that says you will.
Right.
High school, remember
yeah. And it was like another subculture kind of thing, but it was almost like a rule following I'm more righteous than you kind of thing, which I think we all get stuck in lots of various ways. But that was just one way. So even my dad was a smoker, and I thought, oh man, that must be sinful what he's doing there. He must have to ask for forgiveness for this thing because he's treating his body so poorly or whatever. Or just the fact that he's lighting something up and you had to be a certain age to do it makes it sinful kind of thing. So, but I think it's more complicated
okay,
than that.
Right. So I was always told even speeding, was like a sin because you're not obeying the laws of the land.
Agreed. Yeah.
And part of me is like, yeah, okay, I get it. But so talking about smoking, right? So it's not sinful, or it is sinful until you turn 18.
Right.
So when you're 17, 364 days, that's a sin. But after midnight, then it's no longer a sin.
Yeah, see, I've always felt like sin is more of a morality, like a question of morality and not legality.
That's a great way to put it.
And I know that in some, I think Christ says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Right.
Kind of implying about taxes and tithing in that context, but also sort of implying to me, respect the laws of your, where you're living or of your time potentially.
Yeah.
I think you could interpret it that way, but I never really felt like that. I never felt like, oh, just because the government tells me I can't,
right,
doesn't mean it's sinful that I do.
Right. Which is
if it's certain laws, like you said, speeding, I'm glad that you guys built these roads and they're only really designed to go 55. Fine. But if I can do 65 and I'm not endangering anybody,
endangering part.
I don't really feel any kind of moral guilt there. Yeah, if you tell me I'm not allowed to kill anybody, yeah, I would agree with that. I also think breaking that law is sinful, right?
Right.
I'd be curious, back in in the Old Testament times, or really even around Christ's time, stuff like that, when it was the Roman Empire, but then the Jews had their own laws. Did they consider breaking a Roman law that wasn't a Jewish law?
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's a good point.
Or
yeah, I don't think so. So because there was lots of them that were highly religious that were also very anti-Roman.
Right.
Yeah.
So
they didn't think of it like that.
I don't know. It's just kind of, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, man, I don't know what. I think I agree. I think it was more like a more morality thing than it is focusing on the law of the land. It's more about they're trying to line up and live like Christ.
Yeah. And you go to countries in Europe, prostitution's legal. Obviously here it's not.
Right.
So that doesn't change. I think engaging with the prostitute is sinful, whether it's here or whether you're in Europe. So that's where the local government doesn't really affect how I feel about different actions or sins.
Yeah. If I'm going 76 on I-75, I don't think I'm really sinning there.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah, and I actually thought that for a while too. Or that I'm listening, let's say I'm listening to a band that's not a Christian band. This must be sinful because they're not Christians. And so, or I'm reading a book that was not written by a Christian author. Oh, this must be sin.
Yeah, I
Or
never
looking
felt
at
like that.
looking at a piece of art that was not created by the Christian artist. Like that's
Did you are you saying you used to feel that way or did or
I
still
did.
do? Or?
Yeah, and even sometimes still sort of flare up like that kind of thing here and there. But the other way to, and I've thought about it quite a bit in my own life, the other way to look at it is to see the action of God within those things. And that's one other way to look at it, is to say God expresses himself through all these different types of media, sometimes even like unknown to the artists themselves. He expresses his love or his beauty or what have you, and so that there is joy in that. I mean, are there things that are go too far with that? That yes,
Too far.
one of my questions, I think, for that argument of, God can act within any type of thing, or that he can inspire you in all sorts of different ways through different media, is how far is too far with those things. So, can somebody justify watching pornography? Oh, look, this is God made our bodies.
Right.
And look, it's a beautiful act. And they're pretending like they're married on the screen. So,
Yeah, I think you're making an overall bigger point, though, right?
yeah, like what's the line that draws that is
Right,
the
and
line,
it's
or is it just
easier-
a feeling?
Yeah, it's easier to it's less messy and less gray to simply say, hey, you don't drink, you don't do any sort of drugs, you don't do this, you don't do that.
You don't watch R-rated movies, you don't, whatever it is.
And there is some value in it. Like, I mean, because a lot of people can't handle, it's almost like, oh, once you cross this bridge, we're trying to protect you from ever going over across that bridge because once you go there, you won't be able to handle yourself and you won't be able to come back.
Yeah. And there's a lot of truth to that.
There is.
Yeah.
Particularly with substances. Not so much cigarettes, but alcohol,
Right.
and weed, and
Marijuana.
any of these things that are like altering your state of consciousness.
Right.
You absolutely are impaired in your decision making and your judgment,
Absolutely.
and that typically goes hand in hand with putting yourself in situations that are absolutely sinful,
Right.
or a much higher likelihood of being sinful.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot easier just to abstain or to not put yourself in that situation to begin with.
I think that's when I was thinking about substances, just growing up into my adulthood, and looking at what the Bible really says about them, in specific situations for specific people, it does tell them to abstain completely, like in the Old Testament, for example, like the Nazirite vow.
Mm-hmm.
And people have used that to say, well, all Christians should hold themselves to this example also, which I disagree with. But it seems to be a clear indication throughout the entire Bible that drunkenness is a bad thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think to me, that's the idea of going too far with it.
Yeah.
Like what you're saying, well, like it's affecting your decisions in such a capacity that you're making dangerous decisions. Yeah. You're doing risky things that you wouldn't, endangering yourself and others. Like drinking and driving is to me a clear example of something that would be sinful. Drinking and driving.
So I think the bigger question within that then is like, is it, going back to what you're saying, Will, is the general rule don't drink, for example, don't drink. But if you feel like you are mature enough in your faith and able to handle it, you can drink some. Just make sure that you are still able to be responsible within that. Right?
So
Or is that
specifically drinking?
I mean, you can take anything.
So
Drink it.
bring it up as that example. I mean, I'm by far the most experienced drinker here, right?
Definitely.
And I can 100% attest to the fact that when you drink, it's difficult to know where your state of consciousness is,
Right.
and it's very difficult to have the same amount of self-control you would when you're sober.
Right.
Absolutely.
And so you're much more likely to do stupid things, sinful things when you're under the influence of alcohol. 100%.
Sure.
But there's also nothing wrong with drinking alcohol. Jesus drinks wine, right? I mean, it's right in the Bible. There's clearly drinking alcohol is fine. And at no point does it say, hey, you shouldn't drink wine or you shouldn't drink any alcohol. It says you shouldn't be drunk. And there's a definitely like a clear tipping point when you have drank alcohol, one or two drinks,
Yeah.
and to when you cross that line into you're now drunk.
Is it?
And
Because that seems different than what you just said. You said the consciousness is it's hard to gauge that.
When you're drinking, it's very hard to gauge that.
Okay.
Because you can have 2 beers. I'm fine.
Yeah.
But like, well, why are you talking so loud?
Right. Yeah.
You know, it's like, I'm fine. I've had 2.
Right.
And everyone's like, well, you're kind of argumentative. You know, you're kind of like, you're talking about staying out all night. Like clearly like 2 drinks ago, this wasn't in your idea.
Correct. Yeah.
But now it is. And what I meant was like your level, it's very hard to be self-aware while you're drinking of what your state of consciousness is.
Okay.
The most common thing you ever see is drunk people overestimate their abilities.
Right. Yeah.
I can drive home. Oh, I'm going to beat that guy up. I'm going to beat that guy's ass, right? Or whatever. And you're like, dude, you beat him up? You can barely stand up.
Exactly.
You know, but here you are. And here you are. You're sure that you can win in a fight right now and you can't see and you can't walk. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, and if you tell a drunk person, hey, you shouldn't do that, you're drunk. What do they tell you?
Yeah.
I'm not drunk. Don't tell me how drunk I am. I'm not drunk.
Exactly.
Right. So clearly they are now past that point where they have any kind of like self-control or self-awareness or are even like in tune with what their actual state of consciousness is.
Right.
And that's what I was saying. When you're in those states, and it doesn't take long, right? It depends on what you're eating and what you're drinking, all the factors, how tired you are, how stressed you are, all that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it can be 1 or 2 drinks and you can feel drunk. Mm-hmm. And it can be 10 drinks and you don't feel anything, even though you are.
So then within that, is it like, is not drinking supposed to be like keeping you, how do I phrase it? Like, I feel like you can mature in those types of situations where you can go and have a drink and be fine.
A lot of people do that.
Yeah. And a lot of Christians do that.
But there's this perception that is sinful.
Right.
And I don't agree with
specific denominations for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think what is sinful is your lack of self-control and putting yourself into that situation. But you can also, again, within that, mature. And it feels like so many times we say, just don't even drink because you don't want to get drunk and then make a poor decision. But conversely, you could also say, be responsible when you drink. If you make a mistake and get drunk, you need to learn from that.
Absolutely.
And mature into making a better decision.
Yeah.
Right.
And
you know what I mean?
Yeah. And different personalities have different levels of tolerance, I would say. And I don't mean physical tolerance, like how much they can drink. I mean, their personalities are, wow, I've had 2, I better slow down.
Right.
I don't want to end up drunk. And other people are, give me a break. I've only had 2.
Right.
And they're both equally impaired. And they're both on very different trajectories for their evening. Okay. The one guy is going to get 10 beers in and swear he's still fine.
Yeah.
And he can drive and he can do this and his wife won't care if he does that. Right. And the other guy is like, yeah, I'm 2 beers in. Now 3 hours later, I'm a 3rd beer in for the day, but I'm still completely under control. I'm not legally over the limit. I'm not in the point where my decision making is impaired. They're both drinking. They're both having fun.
Yeah.
But one guy is clearly sinful and the other isn't, in my opinion. But
what is the sinful portion?
When you cross that line into drunkenness, that's where I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the law would define that as when your blood alcohol content exceeds 0.08.
Sure.
And realistically, that's probably a pretty good, like there's probably quite a bit of science behind that says, like, yeah, that's where the average person, but there's other people who are 0.04 and they're tipsy and they're out grinding on a dance floor and they're like, whoa, having the time of my life. And there's other people who can be 0.3 and still drive a car.
Right.
Right. And that, that goes back to your physical tolerance and how like often you get drunk and everything. But
exactly.
So it's not necessarily the number, but at some point you become drunk.
Yeah. I think and
that's where it becomes sin.
Yeah. 2 parts I agree with you, Will. I think there's two answers for you, Kyle, for kind of what you're thinking about with when does it become sinful and why is it seen so sinful and why does the church have the approach of just don't do it because you're going to get caught in it or whatever. One is that it's such a dangerous activity like drinking and driving, and we can all have examples of people we know or maybe have heard about that have gotten into accidents from drinking and driving and or fatal accidents, that they've been killed. And so the stakes are so high with drinking. And that's the message is always coming to, and now of course that I think transfers over to other ones. But then also from a Christian approach too, it's like, there was always a sense of like, wherever you go, people are watching you, and you are supposed to be Jesus to these people. So are you going to be a drunk person and not like show who, like it seems like you don't even care about the gospel. You don't even care about what God did for you because you're enjoying yourself or whatever. And I think that talks to what Piper was trying to say in this, is that like, people do think that like if you're not having any fun, then you must be a more devout Christian because you're not enjoying something, because that enjoying something is an immature thing, and so you must not be a mature Christian if you're enjoying something, whether that's alcohol.
You're saying that's what society thinks?
I think that's what,
or a lot of Christian people think.
Like a top-down sort of like Christian idea thinks that if you're not out there like being as somber as possible, then you probably are not a very mature Christian, because people who are mature don't have fun.
Yeah, I think that's
is the opposite of fun.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that's a pretty antiquated look at it.
Right.
I think most Christians don't.
Isn't that we
feel
kind of
that?
Raised in that? I felt like I was raised in that
to some extent. Yeah. To some extent. Yeah.
Maybe now there's a difference because of our generation that are becoming parents, and
yeah, I think yes. I don't think everybody feels that way though.
Okay.
That was my point. I think there are a lot of people who think that, but yeah, I don't think it's everybody. I don't think it's all Christians think that you have to be somber and you have to be unfun and just be sitting in the corner of the bar waiting to go home. Right. And someone's like, "What's wrong, man? Are you having a bad day?" "No, I'm having a fine day, but I'm just trying to remember what Christ did for me." Like, I mean, how weird would that be, right? Like, don't be the Christian martyr. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
You're not witnessing positively to anybody in that situation. I think a positive witness, in my opinion, is like, go be with your friends, go to the bar, have fun, go to the wedding, dance on the floor, like, and do it without being drunk. Do it without using the F word like a comma.
Yeah.
Just go out and have a good time and have like your actions reflect your awareness of what Christ did for you.
Yeah.
And when somebody asks like, "Oh, you don't drink anymore?" or "How come you don't drink, Kyle?" I just never really wanted to. I felt like it was sinful to get drunk and I didn't want to go down that route. I knew my personality, and I think that shows like a lot of self-awareness and reflection on that, and like a commitment to abstaining from sin. Really, is what we're talking about here. It's not abstaining from alcohol or anything. It's just I don't want to be sinful, and my odds of being sinful are a lot higher when I'm under the influence of alcohol.
For sure,
and that's for me for sure. All of the dumbest things I've done in my life are when I'm wasted.
So I think of it a lot of times from like a teaching perspective, because that's just what my brain goes. And I think
such a teacher,
hey, for real. But it's like almost like we teach kids and adults to an extent, or it's like, we don't think we can trust you. We think you should just completely stay away, instead of like teaching what you're just saying, Will, of like, hey, it's okay for you to be in there and doing those things, but you have to have the self-awareness and the maturity to be above it, essentially, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like, we don't think you're going to be able to be above it, therefore you shouldn't even be in it.
Agreed.
And it's way worse for you to screw up a time or a few times than to ever even put yourself in that situation. And I don't know. I'm not sure I fully agree with that. I think we have to make mistakes. You come to Christ for forgiveness and learn and grow and mature within that. And being a dad now, I mean, like, it makes you think about all those things as our kids slowly get closer and closer to that age.
Think
like, how are you going to handle that? Like, because I mean, I'm sure we can all give countless examples of like, hey, don't you dare go out and do that and then it actually made that child or that person more rebellious. Like,
Right.
oh, you're going to tell me
Yeah.
to not do it? No, I'm definitely
want
going
to
to
do it
Right.
more.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
100%. But I think as parents and as teachers, you want them to avoid harm, and you want them to not have to endure the pain that comes with those lessons.
right.
It's easier if you can just take my word for it
Yeah.
and not have to go through a real traumatic experience. Or
Yeah, but do people really learn like that?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly my
questions,
point.
Like, just
yeah.
when you were saying that, like, and I've thought about this too. Just, okay, so we're in a broken world, we're in a sinful world. Maybe a prerequisite of actually learning a deep lesson is the pain of a mistake,
Right.
like a personal mistake.
so, okay, so I agree with you to some extent, right? But let's make it a little more personal. I'll give you an example. Like, we all have daughters. Joey, you don't have kids yet, but the rest of us all have daughters. Do you want her to go out and get wasted at a college party and get molested or raped and then be like, well, now she learned a lesson not to overdrink? Like, wouldn't you much rather just her not overdrink to begin with so that horrible traumatic thing doesn't happen to her?
Agreed. But I'm saying within
For
that,
sure.
You know what I'm saying? So that's what I think, that's what you're getting to, is like, well, I don't want you to learn not to drink and drive because you killed one of your friends. Like you're saying, the stakes are so high. Like, I don't want you to get in a car accident and drive in and have a friend killed, and then you're like, see, now you learned your lesson. You would much rather them just learn the lesson. Like, take my word for it. You can't drink and drive.
Perception of like telling them don't do this.
Yeah, I get what you're
because
saying. I get it.
doesn't always work, right? You know what I mean?
I would say half the
that's a hard
time.
part. So it's
I would
like,
say half the time, and maybe more, it encourages the other way, right?
Exactly.
So,
and then they hide it from you and
Yeah.
say like,
It's a really
I could
hard
never tell
balance,
because because my parents always said don't ever do this.
I wouldn't
as opposed
teach.
to if you say like, hey, be careful in these situations because this happens to girls, this happens to guys. Like,
Yeah, right.
when they get so drunk, they can get taken advantage of. You need to have that on your radar if you're in that type of situation.
Agreed.
You know what I mean?
I wouldn't encourage my kids to be teetotalers when it comes to alcohol specifically.
Yeah.
But I would encourage them to be, I guess. I wouldn't like dictate that they do or I guess my hope would be that like you can have a healthy fear of alcohol.
Right.
Because I think that's lost. Like, you go to a college campus and it's just all fun and games and there's nothing bad that happens when you're like, everyone drinks. It's just what we do. It's so fun. Party this weekend. And it's so like, it's such a pervasive thought because like the reality is there's a lot of horrible things that happen when people are drinking and a lot of lives are ruined because of mistakes when people are drinking. And if I can help my kids understand that before they're in the moment where they're being asked to overdrink, that would be a much more ideal.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I think it's just
Totally.
like, and granted, I'm the one that doesn't have kids in this situation. You have to like being willing to like have an open conversation and don't just call it out and say, oh, don't do that just because it's right or something like that. I think whoever was talking about earlier, like that's like you walk into a room and there's a big red button on the wall that says, don't push this red button.
Right.
The first thing I'm going to want to do when I walk in that room is push that red button.
Heck yeah.
Like if someone doesn't explain to me why I shouldn't be pushing that and something like that. Now, if somebody walks up to me and says like, hey, that red button, and kind of blow up this whole room while you're in it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm not going to push the red button. You know?
Right.
But
Yeah, there's that. And yeah, I think that's human nature. But I guess to my point I was thinking before is that because the world is a sinful world, like maybe when things started out in paradise and we weren't meant to live in a sinful world, we could learn all of these lessons directly from God.
Yeah.
And have a strengthened kind of mature decision-making process that was free from sin. But since this is happening, no, I don't want the people that I love to go through tragedy,
Right.
in any capacity.
Right.
However, if they do, and let's face it, tragedy happens all the time. If and when they do, I want God to be able to use that as much as possible, and I want them to be open to it as much as possible.
Yeah.
So how do we prep them for that kinds of thing? Because like, you can be the most sober driver out there of all time and still get hit by a drunk driver.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? You can be
for sure. Tragedies happen, right?
Yeah, you can be the safest gun, user, or like the safest hunter, and then get hit by a stray bullet or something. So,
Yeah.
like, there's always going to be some kind of tragedy in this world. So, how do we, especially, well, I think it's really it hits you in a soft spot when you think about your kids, because you really want you've seen them all throughout their life, and your natural inclination is to protect them from everything. And isn't that how God views us too? That he wants to protect us from everything, but he also wants us to grow and mature. Like there's that sentiment where some people who have kids, they say, I wish my kids could just stay little forever because they're so cute and they're so innocent and da da da. Like, that's not how God views us. And I've never really thought about that for my kids. I've really tried to just enjoy them at every age.
Yeah.
But like, there is that sentiment that like, let's keep you in a box sort of thing, and you'll never get bigger. And I think that God does want us to grow, but it was like what you were saying, Kyle, like, here's the dangers of growing up, and here's the things that you can do to help prevent some of these dangers, or and then hope that they have a good group of friends that will help them as well.
I think a lot of it too is age-wise, like exposing a child or a kid to something that they're not ready to be exposed to, mature to. I think there are like different levels as you get older of what you're ready to hear and see and
100%
and understand.
For sure.
When I was teaching preschool, I had to call CPS because one of my 5-year-olds described her grandma showing her porn.
Right.
In detail. And it's like, that's going to mess her up for
long time.
Forever.
Yeah.
Not to say like that porn is acceptable at a certain age, but like at some age, having the sex talk in those situations, you have to have those, right? It's not like some of that has to come to fruition. And I think you can take it to extremes on different tragedies, but I'm also okay with my kids failing and stumbling, because they have to learn within that and getting knocked down. And it's about how you respond and how you respond to God, how you respond personally. So I don't know. There's a thin line there.
Definitely.
There's a whole bunch of gray. It's like there's two different lines, right? Where you get drunk, to go back to that, or you can never drink. But the reality is 98% of that is the gray area right in between there.
Exactly.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. And I guess something, my kids, I hope they can learn lessons without like some kind of unbelievable tragedy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right.
Sure.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like I hope that they can, I don't know, it seems so selfish, but like, okay, if they have somebody that they know and it happened to, I mean, like, is that
they could just have one or two bad friends.
Right,
that would be great.
Yeah.
Don't be like that.
We need to sacrifice like one or two of their friends just to show them. That'll be fine. But
we're gonna want to cut that one.
Right.
No, you're right.
It kind of goes back to the original sin, though, right? Where it's like God tells Adam and Eve not
to do something.
Yeah, he doesn't cut the tree down for him, though.
He leaves it there.
Right. He leaves there. He gives them the free will,
and then there's a curiosity.
Yep.
He also
agreed. I was just thinking that a minute ago, and like, there's
Satan is still there, tempting.
Yeah. And I think that's like the model that we should use as parents is to explain to them the limits, and it's our responsibility to help them understand the consequences of their choices, but not to make the choices for them.
Right.
That's what I was saying. I wouldn't tell my kids you're absolutely never allowed to drink. That's you're not a Christian. I wouldn't tell them that at all. I don't feel that way. But I would try to expose them to the consequences of over drinking and what that looks like, and hopefully they're able to make a smart decision that says, yeah, this is a net negative in my life, and I'm gonna do my best to not be like my dad.
Right. Yeah. That negative example. Sometimes negative examples work better than positive examples.
For sure.
Yeah, usually I would say.
I was just thinking, what if you did a Garden of Eden thing at your house where you took like a Christmas tree and put a bunch of bad things on it and said, no, you guys can't go
Donuts.
do this. Right. Yeah. and see how long it will last. They actually did it.
And then if they eat it,
That would be fast.
then if they eat it, condemn them to a lifetime of generational curse.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
They condemn them all to hell for the rest of eternity.
Pain during childbirth and all sorts of things.
And one of us comes like dressed in black and just talks from the background. Did your dad really say don't eat the donut?
Gabby is so annoyed because I've read her that story so many times, and she's like, so what is a serpent? And I'm like, a serpent is a snake. She's like, but they're not a snake yet though, because the serpent tempts them, but the serpent isn't a serpent until after they get in trouble. And then he gets condemned to a lifetime of crawling in the dust on his belly. And I'm like, I know what you're saying, but I'm like, okay, a serpent, it's like a symbolism. She's like, that doesn't make sense. And I'm like, okay, Gabby, I know it doesn't just, can you just please? Why do they say serpent? Oh.
That's really good.
Right, hold on, Gabby. Let me read it to you in Hebrew.
Yeah.
This word isn't so good. But if that was literal, then the idea is that like a serpent had some kind of vertebrae to be able to stand up.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
why?
Had some way, because
back in the day, you mean?
You're cursed to go on your belly from now on.
Yeah. I always think of the serpent as almost like a spirit.
Think so?
Is the way I always thought of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the word in Hebrew?
Nachash.
Does it mean serpent?
Yes. It's the same word that they use for
Snake.
crawling reptiles kinds of things without legs. So there's a plethora of different the Hebrew animal, like what do they call them? Like the different ways that they describe animals, like in
the flora and fauna.
Yes. Or like the animal,
that would be the fauna,
and all the different like specific things that we use, like the scientific names for things. It's much more general.
Yeah.
Right.
Like when they say like, oh, the creepy crawly things. That could mean a plethora of different ways. That could be bugs. That could be lizards.
Snake.
You know what I mean? That could be like,
the neighbor
worms.
next door.
Right. Yeah. It could. Yeah. Which is always interesting. And they talk about the, I said this, I think on one of our last meetings where I said something about
Again, repeat.
Like the giant sea serpents that are in the book of Job. That could be just alligators, or it might be like the Loch Ness monster or something. So like they're
probably the Loch Ness.
It's probably Ness.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, that's it.